Pleasant good day to you all. My name is Ms. Shaquan Quimby, and today I will be doing an oral presentation in the form of a comparative analysis. Today, we will be looking at two poems surrounding the theme of war, which are Green Beret by Mr. Ho Thien and Listening to Sirens by Mr. Tony Harrison. So, it is quite often in the poetic arena that we only try to gain more insight on poems that surround happier themes such as love, nature, etc. However, this analysis will take a different approach by comparing and contrasting two poems surrounding the topic of war, which are Green Beret and Listening to Sirens by Ho Thien and Tony Harrison, respectively. They both describe events that surround military invasion and how it affects the various individuals. This research aims to highlight, compare, and contrast elements of these poems such as thematic focus, poetic devices, poetic forms and structure, mood, tone, and of course my personal response to the poem and a few other things. So, Green Beret. Green Beret, penned by Ho Thien, heavily highlights military brutality. The main characters in the poem have no name except the mercenary on whose actions carry the poem along, and this is according to Poem Analysis. And this is according to Poem Analysis 2022. This poem tells a story of a Vietnamese boy who is threatened with the death of his father if he does not give intel on the Vietnamese people. This is according to Hamilton 2016. This poem reflects the war and turmoil situation of the early 20th century when there was the Vietnam War. The early 20th century did not just mean a difference in literature for the USA, but for other parts of the world, in this case, Vietnam. Therefore, this poem is relevant to the literary period of the 20th century for the particular reason that it is an allegoric account of the Vietnamese War that spiked in 1955 and lasted for over 15 years. Similarly, Harrison's poem tells us a story of a traumatic experience that a resident had. He was probably living in an area where there was a war or some sort of turmoil involving the police. Why would I say the police? It's because there was mention of red and blue flashing lights on with lilac lights as well. He was living in an area that probably had a war or some sort of turmoil involving the police because the mention was made of red and blue flashing lights. So he was probably in an area where war or turmoil was going on. And how? Also, as we read along in the poem, we find that he related to a man who had fought in the war who was having flashbacks and not being able to live in peace because of all the explosions and siren sounds that brought back these memories. Both poems express a feel of uncertainty, terror, trouble, and turmoil. Thematic focus constitutes the theme or subject matter that a piece of work is trying to express. It is important to do critical analysis on a piece of work to derive the thematic focus correctly. Both poems focus on war, or one can say disturbance caused by military invasion. However, the thematic focus is seen through different eyes in the two poems. Thien's poem tells a story from the point of view of a little boy. In silence, and the little boy cried out. Green Beret stood in silence as the boy crouched down and shook with tears as children do when their father dies. Teen 28. It is important to note the type of language used to tell the story through the eyes of a child. On the contrary to Listening to Siren, this poem tells the story from the adult point of view. Additionally, the young man telling the story speaks of another man who was probably in the military before, who still experienced some post-war trauma. A thin man from the war who lived round here, used to berserk on nights, cower, scream, and crap his pants for fear whenever he scented lilac on the breeze. Now let us take a look at literary devices. Literary devices such as metaphors, similes, etc. are used to enhance the quality of a piece of work. The literary devices found in Green Beret include enjambment, personification, and alliteration. The most important literary device of this poem is the enjambment. Then Thien connects the lines using this device for maintaining the flow. There is a repetition of the phrase I do not know, which creates an ironic effect in the eyes of the hurt and which creates an ironic effect. In the eyes of a herd animal, readers can find a metaphor. It depicts the animalistic nature of Green Beret for whom innocent lives don't matter at all. And this is according to Poem Analysis 2022. These devices are effective for the particular reason that it makes comparison between a boy and a hurt animal to show the timid and feeble nature of the boy, and of course placing emphasis on the trauma and hurt he felt simultaneously. In the second poem, there is a heavy use of sense-appealing words, also known as imagery, such as scented, fumes, dazzled, and bright, are all words that appeal to the sense of sight and smell, which allows the reader to imagine what the situation was like in the poem. Poems come in various structures. Depending on the feeling the poet is trying to invoke, he or she will have to choose the most appropriate structure. Green Beret is a narrative poem which is all about a 12-year-old Vietnamese boy having to make a choice between his father's life and that of the Viet Cong. It is loosely structured. It is a loosely structured poem divided into 3 stanzas of varying lengths. The poem is also written in the free verse. Similarly to Harrison's poem, it is also loosely structured and written in the free verse form. The significance of the free verse form. So the free verse form allows readers to read the poem as if it was a straightforward story. So this would lead to the readers not having to do much deciphering. They're just going to read it straightforward, and of course they would have to decipher the literary devices. However, in terms of reading, it's just one straightforward piece with no standard rhyme or rhythm or no standard form. It isn't broken up into many small quatrains or couplets or whatever the case is. They are grouped into stanzas of varying lengths, no standard line length or line grouping and so on. So this would assist them in reading properly or reading as if it was a story that was telling them, because it's a free verse which moves away from any standard grouping of lines and so on. Okay, so now I'm going to be commenting on the rhyme and rhythm of both poems. So Green Beret does not have any rhyme scheme or rhythm pattern. So that's basically straightforward. However, Tony Harrison's poem has a unique rhyme pattern. So it starts with the A, B, A pattern. Then it moves to the C, D, C, D rhyme pattern. And as you go along into the second stanza, you find the D, E, D, E pattern. Then continuing, you have E, F, G, F, G. Then you have H, I, H, I. Then J, K, J, K. So what it is trying to say with this rhyme pattern, every other line rhymes. For example, let me read a little part. Was it the air raids that once lived true? That's A, right? Listening to sirens, then the bombers drone. That's B. And then it continues to say that makes the spring night charter to curfew. So every other line rhymes. So the last word in the first line was true. So the third line, the last word in the third line, it's cur and few. Right, so every other line rhymes. That give you that unique type of rhyme scheme. And yes, so I'm going to be commenting on mood and tone. So both poems, they invoke a mood. Well, let's look at both poems separately. So Green Beret, it invokes a mood of sadness because innocent persons are they're being killed or so, especially in the sense of the little boy. His father was killed, even though he knew all the secrets where the Vietnamese people were in the caves and so on. It was very sad to know that his father would have died at the hands of a soldier, right? So think about it. A soldier is invading, and there is this like war and all of this, warm, upset, turmoil situation in your country or in your area. To me, I would feel my mood would be very sad and eerie. Like imagining all the smoke, all the gunshots, all the fire, all the soldiers running, people being captured, and so on. It would invoke a mood of sadness and, of course, you know, terror and a mood of also being afraid. However, when we speak about the second poem, Mr. Harrison's poem, listening to sirens, it gives more of an eerie feeling because this poem is set in a night time setting, right? Because it spoke about watching red lights clustered with stars and overcast and cars and all these flashing lights and so on. So it gives a very eerie feeling. So imagine there's this night, stars and shining. However, you start to see red and blue lights flashing, people screaming, you're smelling gas and all these things. So this gives you like somewhat of a protest vibe, or yes, an eerie vibe. And then you see cars are here and there, and then you hear alarms, alerts, and all of these things. So that would invoke a mood of eerie kind of feel, like a scare, like what's gonna happen next, a on edge feeling and mood. Okay, so my personal response to the poet's work. So firstly, I'd like to address um Mr. Thiene's work. It's a good poem, but what I think it could have incorporated a little more, um what should I say, some more literary devices, like a little more personification and so on. It could have incorporated that a little more. But I think it paints a good picture. I think it gives us a good insight about what was going on back then in the Vietnam War in 1955. I think it's a good allegory. So I think it's a good way for us to, try to think back. It's like a little way of time travel for us to travel back and imagine how, or let us see from the eyes of a child how the war would have affected not only children but adults and so on, and how these soldiers were, anything they would kill just to get any little piece of information or anything. So his work was good. Besides the fact it could have incorporated a little bit more literary devices. Literary devices such as alliteration, onomatopoeia, a little bit more imagery, sight and sense, and the five sense appealing words and so on. So let's look at listening to sirens. So I think it was a really straightforward poem. This poem also could have used a bit more literary devices such as personification, metaphors, alliterations, consonants, assonants. It could have used that a bit more to relate, or to more put over or enhance the poem more. However, the use of imagery was really, really good when he used words such as fumes and gas and clustered with stars and so on. It really helped you to paint a imagery picture or an imaginative picture of what was going on. So that was good. That was really good when he used a lot of sense appealing words, especially with smell. He talk about the fumes of hell. He talk about the various scents and lilacs. He used a lot of colors too, colorful language. He used red, lilac, purple, blue, mustard colors, all of these different words that appeared all these different words that speak about colors and scents and so on. That was really, really good in assisting with the imagery. And that has brought us to the end of my presentation. I hope you learned something new, and thank you for watching, and see you next time.